Hello and welcome, everybody. This is the see. Let the record show that there actually are people here. So yeah, we're the Linux lads. We have a podcast and we're doing a live recording, so it's all very flying by the seat of our pants. But you know, it's hopefully it goes well. First off, show of hands, who actually listens to the podcast or has even heard of it? Nice. Oh, wow. Okay. That's
more than expected.
That's 5 more hands than I was expecting. Normally it's 4 of us. It's like there's a fourth host who couldn't be here, unfortunately. So Gary from Linux After Dark was kind enough to step in for Connor. Yeah, just for those of you who don't know who we are, we're a podcast. We mostly live in Dublin, Ireland. So me, Mike, and Amulet doesn't. He's
I'm
from
in the US.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So we started it about 4 years ago. It was just born out of the Dublin Linux user group. So yeah, God, I'm forgetting my words already. But yeah, it was born out of the Dublin Linux user group. So we wanted to, basically the whole point of our podcast is to have banter and just have a nice kind of informal chat discussion, you know, to capture that lug spirit where you're just sitting around a table just chatting with your laptops, and 50% of the time you might be talking about Linux, 50% maybe not. Yeah, so the topic of today's episode, I guess, is content creation on Linux, because we were invited to the content and design track of the conference, so it makes sense to kind of talk about how we create the podcast, what tools we use, you know, what challenges and solutions what challenges we faced and solutions we've kind of come up with. But yeah, little bit of history, actually. I took a break from the podcast for a few months, and that's how Amulet came in to give us some credibility.
Not really.
Yeah, so yeah, I guess I'll pass it over to Mike first of all, because he's the guy who the engineer basically behind the scenes who does the publishing of the podcast. So we're just going to run through how we basically produce it first of all, and then afterwards, you know, we can have a chat about like the state of content creation and, you know, just creating something on Linux and open source, whatever it is, because I think it's a fascinating subject. And yeah, but I'll give it over to you and I'll shut up.
All right. Okay. So well, for me, the most kind of important thing is that even though I'm completely useless when it comes to sound or even graphics and those things, I can still kind of creatively do something within a podcast, because I always listen to a lot of podcasts, specifically about Linux and some other about current affairs. And when I started going to the Linux user group or the Dublin Linux community, and met with Shane and Connor had the idea that since we already get around a pint and chat about Linux, we could just as well record it. It was very important to me that I can do something within that that will help me learn something new and help me express myself creatively in a way that I can. Right. So you can absolutely do a podcast and release it on WordPress or something with kind of minimum effort, and there is nothing wrong with that. From where I'm standing, it will do your RSS feed. There are some nice plugins, and you'd be able to publish episode after episode. And if you just want to focus on the content, it will allow you to do exactly that. That's not the route that I wanted to take, because that was not the challenge I was looking for. So what we end up with is what I lovingly call the steaming pile of Python, which is basically when Shane, or Jake these days, who's not here, but our editor Jake, when he produces the files, I take the files, I check out our recording notes where we have quote unquote research, and I basically produce a markdown document that has got the show notes in a way I would like them to be seen on the website or in a podcatcher. And then I created a whole bunch of Python script that basically uses various libraries to get to parse the markdown it turns it into a HTML and then publishes it onto a website. And the website, obviously, we have got a test server and a production server, and it's just the website is as dumb as I can make it. Just a web server that serves static files, because what I basically did there with the Python is basically just another static site generator. And that means that if I create something incredibly insecure with my just enough to be dangerous knowledge of Python, as long as I keep sane way of transmitting the information to the server and sane policies on the server, we are fine. We previously used something called Graph, which is a bit more complicated. It's a server-side technology with PHP on it, and some script kiddie managed to change the, when you have a website and a website tab, they managed to change the heading in the tab. So I said, okay, that's bad. That shouldn't have happened, and I need to make something that I can actually easily and reliably sysadmin. So basically, the process now is I get the nodes, I create a Markdown document, I run a few commands, check how it looks like. I look in the mobile phone, how the test site looks like. If it looks good, I run another command and it's published. That's pretty much about it.
And we usually review. Mike sends us a link to the next episode on the test site, and then all of us look over it, make sure it looks good, and then he publishes it. Yeah,
good point.
Yeah, and like I don't actually do the editing personally anymore. Amala's friend Jake took that over recently because he has far more patience with it than I do. And, because I started out using Audacity to edit, which was fine for, I came into making a podcast with zero knowledge of any of this stuff. I didn't know the first thing about audio or audio editing or any of that stuff. So I was basically learning as I went. Audacity served me well for like a couple of years, but then I don't know, like once you start to know what you're doing and know what you want, you do hit a bit of a limitation. So Ardor was always very intimidating to me, but I learned Ardor then, and Ardor's editing workflow is much more smooth and just nice in general, and also non-destructive editing, which is very pleasant. So in Audacity, I had so many different times where I messed something up, and then I just had to like furiously Control Z, and the men from Ardor just walked into the room, so I was just talking about Ardor. So yeah, I was just saying that for the benefit of the gentleman there, I was using Audacity for a couple of years and then moved over to Ardor because the workflow is just so much better in every way. A bit harder to learn, but not as hard as you might think. Quite intuitive if you're just kind of splicing up a podcast and you're not doing anything. You just add. In terms of like audio effects and stuff, I would just use the built-in plugins. Just like a limiter, make sure that when people laugh or cough or anything, that it doesn't like spike through the roof, and EQ it a bit because we have bassy voices, some of us, so it can sound a bit weird on the recording. And then just compression to make it sound a bit more professional, and all the usual stuff, just to smooth out those peaks and everything in the recording. I'm not a good editor, so that's why it's so nice that Jake has taken over, because he spends hours and hours on it, whereas I was like, I need to get this done in less than 4 hours or I'm going to pull my hair out, because I just have no patience. So yeah. That's kind of the general gist of how we make the podcast. Am I forgetting anything?
Yeah, I mean, when I said research, is actually Amole who does most of the research, because none of us know anything else.
Yeah, but as you can see, like it's the point we're trying to make, I guess, is that you can make something like this entirely on open source tools. It is possible, and it works really well. Like.
Oh yeah, and of course there is the kind of marketing, promotion, engagement part, which I know nothing about, but it's a kind of Connor's forte, where he's capable of being on Twitter. He can actually talk to people, unlike my introvert itself and everything. So there's a big thing when you can basically go out to people and talk to them and maybe get the word of mouth going, because for an open source podcast or a Linux related podcast, word of mouth is the best kind of promotion.
Yeah. Sorry, if anyone's listening to this after the fact, we have our logo up on the projector screen and it keeps disappearing.
My laptop went to sleep. I'd have to walk over there and unlock it again. So don't worry about it. It's okay.
I'm curious, actually. I was going to talk about something else, but I completely blanked on it. But no, it's fine. I'm actually curious, like who in this room, like show of hands, actually makes something creative on Linux or open source in some fashion? Okay, so yeah.
Would it be like mostly code, or would it be mostly, I don't know, sound, graphics, media, or written word?
By the way, there's some audience mics out there hanging around, so feel free to pick one up and
yeah, between those two gentlemen in front row, if you want to say something, just shout into that.
If anyone has anything to contribute, we never really get to speak to real people on the podcast, so if you want to jump in.
Sure. I'd be happy to say that on the Ubuntu desktop team, I make an Indaba every month. It's like a 1 hour AMA live stream. I've looked at like recording myself playing, ukulele and guitar and put that stuff up, but same as you, like I have no patience for editing. That is free form. If you say a bad word, sorry, it's just going to be on YouTube. I'm not doing any editing.
To be honest, if you listen to our podcast, when we say a bad word, it goes there, and we have a disclaimer on the side. There's a big E when you look into like Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts. This is explicit on there because we just won't bother not swearing.
I appreciate that you do editing and you leave this in.
Yeah,
it's the right call.
I mean, it's a podcast for adults.
So me and you do the podcast well, Portuguese every week, but we pay someone to edit the shows.
Yeah, it's a sound decision.
The first year and a half, we do time editing, but we usually record like one day, and it took about 2 to 3 weeks to have the job done. And some of the shows weren't even published because they were dated and it was not make sense to publish anymore. So we started. So we pay. We have some Patreons, but there's not. They don't cover the expense of the editor. But we prefer to do it like this.
Yeah. I just noticed we haven't actually gone to Gary once. He's just been sitting there.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's there to obviously make us look presentable because for the benefits of the audience in who's listening to this, he's got actually a shirt and I think it's ironed, whereas the rest of us looks like we've been picked out of the street.
I mean, I'm here in lieu of Connor, right? So I think there was at one of the Linux podcast events in the UK, there was a co-host who was replaced by a pint of beer on a chair. So as long as I fulfill that, then it's all good. I mean, I was going to ask you guys one question. It's probably a question to the room as well. Is you've been doing this for 4 years, right? And how do you think the tooling in Linux and some of the FOSS tooling has improved and changed over that time? Yeah, and really enabled your workflow. Because I remember even
like editing, like is the hard part actually the tooling or like the technical part of editing, or is it really like deciding what to put in the podcast, like listening and making the decisions for the content?
I can actually kind of answer both of your questions at the same time. The tools have always been there. They haven't really gotten better or worse. They have gotten slightly better. I mean, obviously, like Ardor has had a few great updates in the last few years. But even when I started using it, it was much the same as it is now, So, as you guys know, it doesn't change dramatically that much. And that's good because it just kind of works and it's stable and whatnot. So, the tools were always good. I mean, I never really had any issues with any open source tools like Audacity or a funny story, actually. Sorry, just to get back to your question, Robin. The content editing was the part. It was never the tool that got in the way, to be fair. I always found it quite fluid to edit on Ardor, so it's very nice in that way. But it's the content editing, deciding what to put in and leave out, and but then there's all the tedious stuff like covering up people's mouth noises and cutting out like coughs and like and like gross mouth noises and everything. And squeaky chairs, things like that, and people breathing too heavily on the mic. Shots fired. But
phone vibrating on the table.
Yeah, click at the clock on the screen.
Our very first episode was terrible. It was like you could hear us banging on the table as we were speaking, and it was terrible.
Typing on keyboards and all sorts of stuff, right?
Yeah. The very first episode was us in Connor's house at his living room table with a towel on the table, with a Blue Yeti microphone in the middle of all three of us. You can understand how bad that sounded. But yeah, I had another interesting story that I completely forgot to mention before. Our logo, which has disappeared off the screen again, is I actually made that myself, but I designed it in Blender first of all, like as a 3D model, because I had all these I imagined that I would have this like video thing, like put our episodes on YouTube essentially with like a spinning 3D logo and have it look really cool and have a visualizer kind of thing going on. Nice. The logo's back on the screen. But it turned out that I didn't know how to get an SVG out of Blender, which seems like it should be simple, but apparently isn't. I just thought it's lines and dots, so that's an SVG. So why doesn't it work?
Just describe Blender in one sentence. It should be simple, but it isn't.
Yeah, exactly. So what I had to do was I had to take that logo. That's a variation on it, but what I had to do was take the logo from Blender, export it as like a PNG, like the highest possible resolution, so I didn't get any blurry edges or whatever, and then import it into Inkscape and painstakingly like draw lines and curves over it just to make an SVG.
You just basically traced it, yeah?
I traced it with Inkscape essentially. Jesus. It took me about a week because you can see all these tiny like the all the details within the faces on the logo. I had to do all of that, and even the little gentle curves on some of them, like I had to do that as well. So that it was terrible.
Just to specify, the QR code wasn't part of that.
No, I didn't do the QR code.
I wanted to come back to something that to what Gary has asked. I don't think the tooling changed. The way I learned to more and more, that obviously changed. But what changed is the environment. So when we started 2018, then obviously, there was a couple of podcasts, but I think there are now more podcasts in like definitely in the Anglosphere, related to Linux, and I think they are all getting better. Like the information is flowing faster, and I think it is more and more difficult to do kind of a research and have a relevant conversation, because none of us work in this industry, right? So, well, we are kind of all working in tech. We are more or less Linux adjacent in some parts, but it's not like we live in the middle of Linux news or system administration. So it is really, I think where it is headed is maybe like less news and more trying to be thinking about the things that we can think about, that being the Linux community, that being how we use Linux. But because there is a lot more environment than there used to be.
Yeah, there's just so much more you can do with it nowadays. It's just insane. When we started the podcast just under 5 years ago, I guess. I mean, the tools were already there, weren't they? I mean, like, but you go just 5 years before that, and there wasn't as much choice. It was a bit mad. Like, it just kind of accelerated out of nowhere, and we went from Linux being quite humble and the apps being kind of okay to all of a sudden, Christ, we have everything now. Like, we have so many choices, so many different things to play with on Linux, which is a nice problem to have. But yeah, does anyone else have anything to say? Yeah, I think there's a mic floating around there.
I wanted to ask, like, if you guys, what are your opinions of like the recent move to like Pipewire over Pulse Audio?
I love Pipewire. It's amazing.
I love Pipewire too. I never wanted to mess with Jack, and Pipewire has just like made music production on Linux for me personally possible.
It's simplified
because
everything
like
so much.
Bitwig Studio and Ardor and all of these really cool applications support Jack, but now they also support Pipewire, and Pipewire, in my experience, just works, while Jack was a bit of a pain. So absolutely, Pipewire is awesome.
Yeah, it is 100%. Like, I could not believe it. I was like, what's the catch here? Like, all my devices are just working, and I actually had way more options than I had before. Like, I got access to like features of my audio interface that I wasn't getting through Pulse Audio for some reason. And yeah, it was really cool. And you could I had like the Carla patch bay. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that. It's like it's like an audio routing kind of thing for Jack. But when you have Pipewire that just plonks in and it can pretend it's Jack essentially, and that's the technical term. But yeah, you just plonk it in, and it like for all intents and purposes, everything thinks they're using Jack, but it's actually Pipewire underneath the hood. But like, I could connect my webcam mic to my speakers if I wanted. Like, I could just connect everything up to different, from any source to any input. Like, it was crazy, or output, I should say. But yeah, it was nuts, and it was just so easy, and it just like worked like that, like crazy.
For people who don't know, like me, what any of that works, GNOME audio recorder is the best tool ever. There's a button that you press, and you start talking, and then you press the button again, and it will save, and then you save it, and you have a sound file that you can give to people who know what to do with the sound files.
I mean, if you're recording a podcast, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, yeah, all you needed to do is record the audio, and then you're away. So,
There were some like hardware requirements though that we have to have, like software tooling one. But we started, you said, with a Blue Yeti. That was a bad choice.
Yeah,
And then you made us
that was a bad choice.
all get what are they called? Microphones that are not like the Blue Yeti and audio interfaces.
Sorry.
So you basically, Shane, made us all get, I don't know what they are called, the microphones that are for recording of sound in a studio. Probably, yeah.
No, we had condenser mics, but then they were picking up everything in the house.
You wanted that?
Yeah. So a condenser is good when you have like a acoustically treated studio and stuff. It picks up more of the voice. It gets better quality recording, but it also just picks up everything around it. So then we switched to dynamic mics, and they were really nice. Paul?
So I don't know how much this applies to your podcast, in the sense that I know how often you have guests on that we do remotely. If you do that, I'm just curious, in the open source space, what you use for the connection, because I've noticed, over the last couple of years I've done podcasts, and I've been the remote person connected, and it seems like nobody uses the same thing.
Yeah.
Some people choose to use. I think I did one we even did with Skype. It doesn't seem like there's a particularly super obvious choice for, we're going to do an interview with this person and they're somewhere else. How are we going to? How are we connected? Do you have any thoughts or reflections on that?
Yeah, that's funny you should say that. That's a problem. That's a challenge we had quite frequently, and that we're still trying to figure out, because how we do it normally is we have a Jitsi meet, and then we will have we will ask the guest to record themselves locally, and then send us the file afterwards. It's a bit of an imposition sometimes. You don't want to. It's like they're coming on the podcast. You don't want to have to ask them to do stuff, and sometimes we're like, maybe we should have that better figured out. So we're not asking our guest to do work for us, because it just seems a bit rude sometimes. But I don't know. Most people don't really mind. Like, they just fire up Audacity or GNOME Sound Recorder or whatever. And we even had one lad record his audio on his phone in an airport bar before. So it sounded like shit, but it was feasible. It was workable, I should say. But yeah, that's I don't know if you ever figured that out. Let me know, because that's a problem. Yeah, like a remote recording thing would be really nice. One thing we did do, we briefly went over to a software as a service thing called Riverside FM. So it's like podcast recording thing. It's kind of like Zoom and Audacity mashed together essentially, and it records everybody's. It runs in the browser, but it records everyone's audio locally, and then you can do noise reduction on the fly and stuff, which is nice. But we hit a limit of the free tier, and we couldn't get separate tracks for each person, so you had to pay the premium to get that.
So the free tier was you get 2 hours of recording a month, and until you pass that 2 hour mark, you can record all the participants, or you can download all of the participants' tracks individually. That's what allows you to edit one person and remove some clicking noises in the background while someone else is talking. But when you pass that 2 hour mark, all you get is one track with everyone mashed together, and you can't really do any editing while someone else is talking.
Yeah.
And that episode was just a mess, so we didn't air it.
That was actually only like 2 weeks ago that happened. Yeah. Actually, it completely nuked the episode on us. We couldn't release it because it was just uneditable. So we just had to kind of do it again, and it was delayed. So yeah, then we learned our lesson. We're like, okay, don't trust these bloody tools. Like, just do it yourself. At least you know what you're getting into.
Or you could pay yourself out of the problem. If you wanted to drop the money on Riverside, we could have done it, but that's probably against the spirit, kind of.
Exactly, yeah. And we were kind of proud of the fact that we were doing this all 100% open source on Linux and everything. So, yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. So you talked a bit about Pipewire, and how that's really cool. Are there other features or things in the Linux desktop or desktop environments that really make your lives easier, that you really like? Or I guess on the converse, are there things that get in your way when you're doing your production?
Specifically in desktop environments.
For me, the one tool, because I don't use Pipewire or Jack, the one tool that is completely indispensable is PAVU control. Because I can go in and turn off every single input and output other than the USB DAC that I have. And it's indispensable. And if anyone wants to record a podcast on Linux, install PAVU control, turn off all of the audio interfaces apart from the one you're using. And yeah, you'll never end up with your crappy webcam mic being used to record a podcast again.
Even though I do use Pipewire, I still use PAVU control because it can manage sound levels and everything through Pipewire. Yeah.
One of the nicer things, in my opinion, about recording on open source is just that you're not inflicted with the problems that Windows gives you. On 2.5 admins, Joe and I record on Linux, but Alan uses a Windows laptop, and we constantly have to ask him, you don't have Chrome open, do you? Because if you've got Chrome open on Windows, it messes with your audio levels. You can't tell it not to. You can't control how it does it. It just decides to do that. Even Chrome on Linux doesn't do that. So Alan is the only one who has that problem. It's inflicted on him because Windows.
Circling a bit back, me and Thiago, we have always recorded remotely. We have never together. I was living in Belgium, he was living in Portugal.
Yeah.
One time. Okay. And David then joined us. He was in the Netherlands, so we were recording in 3 different locations. And we started by recording with Mumble. Mumble is really good at that, and it gets the tracks and all of that. But we were missing some interaction that comes naturally when you see each other. So we started Jitsi to the mix. And then we found out about OBS Ninja, now Video Ninja. And that's what we are using now. We record, each one records his own track one. We have the Zoom H4s, but when we have guests, we just use the Video Ninja feature that allows it to record on the browser.
I'd love to start using that, actually.
Upload the file to Video Ninja, and we get this file, and it's really good quality.
Yeah,
I think that's the one that Martin Wimpress used for the Forstall.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's really impressive. Like, it's really cool. It's a cool tool. I'd love to actually give it a whirl and see if we can use it. I think that would be amazing.
Yeah, back to the, like, when you said desktop environments, I always find this is a stupid small thing, right? But because I have one monitor, I want it to be able to see them in some shape and form so I can recognize facial expressions, otherwise I can't talk. I wouldn't be able to do it on Mumble. I have to see the guys if I'm talking to them. and then have the show notes, and then have some confirmation, visual confirmation that the thing is still recording. So that means I need some kind of a decent tiling. Although in GNOME is kind of all right, and that's what I use. But I wouldn't be able to do that if I couldn't see either of those things.
I have to say, one of my favorite things about Linux is tiling window managers. They're the best thing ever.
I'm saying that you're a hipster.
Maybe a little bit.
Yeah, God. How are we doing on time, actually?
Oh, we have plenty of 25 minutes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
We probably should have taken the shorter slot. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. You talked about the software used to create the content. I was also wondering about the hardware. Can a person just go buy any DAC, microphone, everything will work amplifier with Linux, or do you need to be careful with that stuff?
Yeah, it depends. Oh, yeah, I suppose actually, yeah, because we did have a situation where, because I use, and I think you use the same one. It's a Behringer
Euphoria.
UM2, I think. Very basic kind of audio interface. It's only like 60 or 70 quid. But it works, it's fine. And it's like, I think it's like 48 kilohertz or something, or 48,000 kilohertz or something sample rate. So it's not amazing. You're not going to record an album on it or anything, but like it does for a podcast. It's fine. But connected to that, then I have a Shure SM58, I think. And it's a fairly inexpensive microphone, and it does the trick. And then you just put it on a stand, and away you go. And but the audio interface connects to the PC by USB, and it kind of just works out of the box because it's class compliant, I think. So it just works, and it gets recognized as an audio device. You do have some problems. Like there are problems, but for the most part, it's fine.
This one's fine, but we remember, like, I don't know, 3 years ago, Connor had to actually switch to Windows. For recording.
I forgot. I was going to say that. Yeah,
he had Scarlett something.
Yeah,
Everybody was telling him.
I have one of those. It works very well with Linux.
Everybody else was telling him this.
No, he had the Focusrite Scarlett 2i2, I believe it was. Right. And he had an awful time with it. It just wouldn't work properly in Linux. Like he would get it working sometimes, but then it would just die. He'd have to reboot again, and he would actually have to record some of our episodes on his Windows partition because it was the only place he could get it to work. So
a quick bit of background on that. One of the reasons the situation has gotten so much better over the years. One of the reasons it's gotten so much better is the iPad. When the iPads came out, there are no drivers. Companies cannot have you install a driver on the iPad, and all these companies that are making audio interfaces wanted their devices to work with the iPad, and so they were forced to actually make them really class compliant and go without drivers. And the result has been over the last 5 to 8 years, we've seen a whole bunch of these devices that 8 years ago they were sort of working, but if you wanted to use their driver, now everything needs to work on an iPad with no driver, and therefore it just works on Linux too. Which really does mean that you can just go out the door, and if you buy a USB interface now, it's like a 99% chance that it'll just work, with no issues. Thank Apple for that.
Yeah, wow, that's something I didn't know actually. Yeah, that's interesting.
What do you guys use? I have the interface that he said, and the cheapest mic I could get on Amazon, and I don't know what it is. So,
So I've got a Rode Podcaster mic from eBay. It's a USB mic. It arrived blown, so I have to be careful not to talk too loud, or everything just sounds absolutely terrible. I need to upgrade soon and get a proper USB interface and a proper mic, but that is what I use. It is possible to get a decent quality podcast with a really cheap mic, but it's best to go with something like a dedicated audio interface.
Yeah, I've got two setups that I use because one is permanently attached to my desk and one I chuck in a suitcase when I go on the road. So I've got a slightly nicer of those Behringer UM2s. I think it's a slightly nicer one. It's got a couple of channels plus an instrument level input. And I use that with an SM58 when I'm at home, and then just a pop shield over the SM58. And then when I'm traveling, I've got the UM2, which I picked up on a Black Friday sale for about 30 euros or something. Like you can pick them up super cheap when they're on sale. And then I have a Samsung Q7, which is it's effectively an SM58 clone, but again, you can pick them up super cheap on Amazon, and it's cheap enough that I don't worry about chucking it in a suitcase when I travel.
Yeah.
It's a funny thing. So before I got this microphone, I used to use the Blue Yeti that we all had one, I think, and it was terrible. I was being told that there's too many noises in my recording. So, and we've moved and we've just bought a new fridge. So I actually kept the box from the fridge and enclosed myself in it and took like a smaller box and a bathroom mat and wrapped it all around the three sides of the Yeti to create kind of a seclusion for the audio. It still didn't work. What worked was really like €15 microphone from Amazon and a cheap audio interface.
Yeah. Oh yeah. In the early days, I was using my own mic was a USB blue Snowball, not the Yeti one, the gray one, like the one that's like a globe on a tripod, basically. And that thing was just terrible. It's just a really bad mic. Never buy it. I mean, you get what you pay for. But that's the thing as well. The setup I have now, the SM58 and the Behringer audio interface and everything, probably cost about the same as a Blue Yeti or something, which is kind of ridiculous if you think about it, because you get so much better quality from the audio interface and the real XLR mic, and it costs about the same as one of those USB ones.
There's a whole website. I don't remember the name of it, but the entire website is dedicated to saying, don't buy a Blue Yeti. Buy these other things instead, because the Blue Yeti is just terrible.
Yeah, I agree with everything on that site.
Yeah, I mean, the takeaway for me is, if you need about $150, euros, pounds to spend, but buy a USB audio interface, buy a dynamic mic, buy a pop shield for the dynamic mic, and you'll probably be fine.
Yeah.
The site, it will be in the show notes, of course, but the site is don'tbuyyeti.com.
Yeah, or generally, if you're recording at home and you don't know how quiet your environment's going to be, if you're doing it in a bedroom or an office, just don't buy a condenser mic.
Yeah, I made that mistake. With the Snowball, I basically had to do something similar to you. I had to create like a little cardboard towel fortress that the mic lived inside of, just to make it sound anyway decent. Go ahead.
If I were to cost it, like if anybody's interested, how much it costs to like have a podcast like this, like we do, obviously provided that you already have a computer and you spent about, €100 on the various cables and microphones and the audio interface, if you go cheap like I do. And then I think the only other thing that we pay for is the hosting for the website, which is a Hetzner VPS. If you're not very famous, like we are not, then you don't need Spotify level infrastructure. Then you can literally just do. We are still working off a sub €5 droplet, not droplet because it's Hetzner, but our VPS is really cheap, and it's all like, I think it's super cheap, and that's what I wanted like people to take out of this whole thing is like, if you want to make a podcast, it's easy and cheap and it's fun, and it's really rewarding as well.
Yeah, sorry, I was I was just reading my notes here. So I think we've basically covered like every single aspect of how we make this podcast, which is really nice. Is there anything I'm forgetting? Because I feel like there was another aspect to this, like the community side of things, and
there is a social aspect to it. So how do you get four guys from two different time zones with different lives to sit around and talk quasi intelligently about something they know a little bit about, right? So I think we find it quite difficult to keep the schedule, and everybody says keep the schedule. You owe it to your listeners because they will go away if you don't release on time every time.
And that's why our listenership has basically stagnated for 2 years.
Well, yeah, I mean, because we find it really hard, like to wrap it around our lives,
Yeah, it is what it is. I mean, like we're not doing a podcast to be like super famous or earn loads of money or anything. Like I have a day job. Like I don't. It's fine. I can pay the bills that way. But I don't know. It's just fun. It's just fun to do something, isn't it? Like to make something. Like that's kind of the whole point of it. I know that's all deep and philosophical or whatever, but yeah, that's one thing I was genuinely surprised, just to speak about the kind of the community aspect of all this a bit more, because that's really interesting to me. It's like yesterday I was really struck by how many like musicians and artists and creative people and like all these kinds of people. I was really surprised to see so many people like that and so many talks on that, and that's definitely something I like to cheerlead myself, is kind of the things you can do on Linux and open source are pretty incredible nowadays. Like you can do so many things. Like you could produce a film on Linux if you wanted nowadays. If you have Blender, Kden Live, you can do visual effects, you can do video editing. DaVinci Resolve works. That's not open source, but like it still works on Linux. And then you have music software out. You have both open source and closed source, and yeah, you just have so many options now, and you can do so much stuff, and it's crazy. And that's what I'm trying to get across to people, is just show them like all the different things you can do, and even designing the logo on Blender and Inkscape and everything, like but I don't think you really need to convince anyone of that nowadays either. I suppose everyone kind of knows it, but I think it's the kind of the people outside of our little world that you need to convince.
Well, I think it's always going to be the kind of, I don't want to do it manually. I'm going to if somebody wants to run a podcast, they are not into Linux, why should they do it on Linux? Because they want to be, focusing on the content. The question is it easy to do it on the Mac, or is it easier to do it on Windows than it is on Linux? And I think maybe that's what in the last, 10 years has gotten kind of almost even. I don't know what people would use. If you're obviously locked into your Adobe tools, then you have to stay on Windows or the Mac. But if I think, and that's me being the least, informed about editing, but I think that if you are willing to learn different tools, or if you are starting from zero, then it kind of doesn't matter. As a lot of it is happening in the browser anyway these days. Sadly, it often has to be Chrome because people just require it.
Yeah. When we had that remote recording solution, we had to use Chromium because it wouldn't just straight up refuse to work in Firefox. We've got a question.
How much preparation do you do before a show? That's maybe a personal question. Hypothetically.
And we are running out of time.
And research and stuff, or do you kind of do it more extemporaneously?
Well, as Mike said, I think we're out of time. No, we don't do half enough preparation. No, not at all. I do effectively zero. I just show up and hit record.
Yeah, I mean,
the other guys do though. The other guys are the researchers and stuff, and I'm just the guy who tries to be funny all the time.
And not that you could tell, our preparation for this was we met in the hotel bar yesterday and had 3 pints of Guinness. And that was about it. So,
I am a researcher because that's my kind of day job, but I don't do enough research. Amolif actually is the one who does the most research. That's how he came with all the credibility that we now have.
Well, we're being a little bit unfair to ourselves, I think. We do some preparation, and we did do some preparation for this, and we did communicate with Canonical and everything to make sure it was all set up the right way and everything. So we did do something.
Oh yeah, we have notes.
And we have notes right there on the screen. Look,
can you believe that?
So just to get back to your question, I guess, but that's the beauty of the podcast, because I feel like sometimes we don't even have to do preparation, because personally, what I try to encourage the other guys to do is if you're interested in something, if you have a piece of software you think is really cool, or you're interested in a language, or I don't know, a library or something, just talk about it on the podcast. It's just your opportunity to talk about something that you're interested in. And if you talk about something you're interested in, it's probably going to be engaging,
I wanted to mention something. You were talking about equipment earlier. If you need to go even cheaper, because you're not starting your own podcast, but maybe you've been invited to guest on a particular podcast episode. That was actually how I got started. I guested on podcasts until Joe Ressington was tired of it and said, "Hey, do one every week with me." But if you just get invited to guest and you're not used to recording, and you have nothing, you don't want to go out and spend $150 on gear, get yourself a cheap gaming headset, just like a little USB gaming headset. That was what I did when I was guesting, and every single podcast I guested on was like, your audio is so much better than we usually deal with. Now, is that enough for like if you're actually producing a podcast? No, but if you're guesting, it will put you so far above the people that are just talking at the little condenser mic on the laptop.
Just make sure the mic isn't right up against your mouth. There are so many noises, then it sounds terrible with that.
Yeah, and even one of those really cheap gaming headsets for $20, $30 is going to be better than a pair of AirPods. Like the amount of podcasts I listen to, and you can just tell that someone is using Bluetooth headphones. Yeah, just go and spend $30 on a gaming headset from Walmart or Best Buy or something, and it's going to be infinitely better sounding than any Bluetooth device.
I think we had one, as you said, that was recorded on an iPhone through the wired headphones. That was probably.
Oh yeah, the one with the inline mic that's on the wire.
Yeah, I mean, even that is better than AirPods or whatever. But yeah, just go and get something that's half decent.
And I guess back with the preparation question, I can talk a little bit about how I do the research into stuff and find news topics. Is RSS all the way. It is the best way to get your news. I use something called YAR, which stands for Yet Another RSS Reader. And it's just like a really simple Go binary. You throw it on a server or on your local machine, execute it, add your feeds, and it has everything I want when I'm looking for stuff. And as far as feeds I'm subscribed to, the big ones are like Slashdot and Lobsters. Ars Technica is really good. For general news, you kind of have to filter it out a little bit so you remove what you're not interested in. But RSS is the best way to get news.
There is a not plugin. What do they call them? For Nextcloud, there's an application for RSS, and you can basically have that reader. There are applications for mobile phones for both iOS and Android that you can get to connect to that. So then you can have you can be bombarded by hundreds of news every minute. It's brilliant. And I forgot to tell, Nextcloud is actually part of our infrastructure. That's because that's what the recording notes are on. When we record, but basically the research that most of Voice does, that ends up in a Nextcloud document. And another software as a service as we use is pCloud, where we store. Now we use this Nextcloud for storing the audio files in the process of editing them. Yeah.
It's somewhat related to that discussion, but from the open source project side, what can open source projects do to make your lives easier? Like if you were going to cover them on a show.
Do you mean something that's like would be useful to us that we'd like to see? Is that what you mean, like, or a tool that?
Also be an interesting discussion. No, as far as like the communications from open source projects, or like how can open source projects improve how you discover their information, or like when you're doing research into an app or a project, what could they do better?
I don't actually. That's a good question, because I don't know, because for most of the things I've discovered, the tools I've discovered have been through either recommendations, word of mouth, or through just watching a YouTube video, like tutorial or something, and then you'll get like a lot of these listicles online or videos on YouTube where it's like 5 of the best free audio editors, or all this kind of stuff. And I don't know, at the end of the day, that's mainly where I'll find out about them. But I don't really know what the projects themselves could do to
So
make us aware of them. I don't know.
So, well, to me, we have obviously we have feeds from already news, like from OMG Ubuntu and stuff like that. But I hope that open source projects themselves will never stop publishing their own RSS feeds, and then I have this idea, because I work with data, and I think and I study as well, and I think it would be a nice project to have to take a bunch of these streams, because it's very, it's varied. It's varied in how often it's published. It's varied in format, but the format of RSS is actually fairly standardized, including comparing podcasts and podcast RSS and like written word RSS. It's very similar. So I think whenever I get to it, would be nice to have like a single stream or a few streams that you can split by topics or by importance or whatever, to basically work with it and classify it as a give it some metadata or something, some kind of context, and group it that way. In terms of what open source projects can do, it's a good question, and I also don't know. It would be good to have information a bit more like kind of classified and maybe tagged as well.
I think we're almost on the time. Just to.
Oh, 5
minutes time.
Like Jim just said, emails. I saw Michael Tennell's open source marketing talk earlier, and he said that projects should be proactive in contacting podcasters and YouTubers and news websites and all this kind of stuff. And I think that is probably the best way to get your project featured somewhere. Like, I do monitor a whole bunch of feeds from a lot of different places, but things still slip through. I don't notice this. This one just, I scroll by it. But being proactive and getting that notification saying, hey, we've got this new thing, this really big feature, I think that's probably a really good way.
Yeah, and I think for me, just the other two things I would add to it is make yourself available if you're an open source project. It might be that a podcaster will want to have a chat with you about it. They might want to bring you on the show or whatever it is, right, to talk about what your project is and what it does. But the other thing is, if you're a more mature project and the word is already out there, release notes. Write release notes and make them concise and make them good, because with the best will in the world, I have a job where I work 10 hours a day. I don't have the time to go and try out every single project. But if I can get a flavor from your release notes of what your project is, what it does, what's hot in this new release, then that goes a long way to making me want to actually talk about it on air.
I wanted to say exactly the first thing I said. Basically, if you are interested as a amateur podcaster, it's really kind of, do I really want to write to that guy who just spent a long time in a sprint making this new release of his project? Do I really want to go to these people and tell them, can you come on our show and we just talk to the public about what you just did? Especially since the Venn diagram of people who do some stuff and people who like to talk to public is not, it's not that many people, and it's difficult and it's hard. So yeah, as Gary said, it's important. It would be good if maybe. No, I don't want, if projects could kind of, don't be shy about asking if you can come on the show, like write to us or anybody and just say, listen guys, we have these people, we have this that just happened, we just did something great, would you like to talk to us? There are projects that actually do that. In some cases, those are the ones that you don't really want to talk about because they are usually trying to say, whenever there is commercial interest, like a pronounced commercial interest, you usually hear about them way more, because obviously there's money involved and there's usually people doing it full time, and they would be a bit better at putting themselves out there. But if you are an open source developer who does it as a hobby, you might also feel the same shyness as the hobbyist podcaster feels. So shy at both ends, and they will never meet.
Yeah.
I guess to sum that up, watch Michael Tennell's talk once it's released. it was really, really good.
Yeah. So I think this was great fun. Actually, I really enjoyed this. We're pretty much on the time. I think it's like 5:02. So the next talk might be barreling in here at any moment. But I just want to say, thanks so much for contributing and for coming in general. Everyone asked really cool questions and everything. It was a good discussion. So thank you very much.
And thanks.
Any final words there?
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Gary. And I'm just got a cramp in my leg.
Oh, that's perfect.
What a way to get out. What a way to go out, huh? Get a Charlie horse, huh?